Welcome everybody to another episode of Bones and Stones. Today we're very excited to have recognized Sambo with us, who's currently a WITS master student. Recognize and I have had quite a bit of time together in the lab. It's where I met Recognize, and we've been working on different projects and stuff together in the lab and stuff, so it's been great to get to know you there. I know most of our discussions were arguments over whether bones are cooler or stones are cooler, but either way, that's a whole separate topic. But no, but Recognize, today we thought we'd bring you on and stuff and just talk a little bit about your experiences in archaeology and stuff, and a little bit about your research background as well, and maybe touch on a little bit what got you into archaeology as well. So yes, we'd be really keen to hear your story today. So if you're keen, you can take it away.
Okay, so I'll just start talking a little bit about how I got into archaeology and all that. Just keep it short. So okay, I found out about archaeology when I was in primary school, grade 7. So I was reading like an English paper, and like I just came across a discovery of a hominin skull by, I think, Lieberger's son, if we are allowed to use names here. And then I asked most of my teachers to do a little bit of research for me, because then you don't have the technology, you don't have all the the things to do your own research and all that. So I tried to get a lot of information from my teachers, and I made sure that I took subjects that were related to archaeology. So when I got to WITS, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do archaeology, but I didn't know that it was going to be so intense. Okay, so I started my undergrad knowing very well that this is what I want to do. But what helped me a lot in archaeology was, a lot of the field work that I did, and a lot of, lab works that I did, that really made me feel like, what, this is the field that I want to be in. Because I realized that, sitting in class and just, listening to a lecturer teaching and all that really cannot convince you enough to know that this is the field that you really want to be in. Because, archaeology is more about, practical work and all that. So I got myself into the field. I also worked with Met Marana as well at Kundrai. I tried to get myself involved in a lot of them, and yeah, here I am today. I'm happy that I chose, archaeology, and yeah. So my interest in archaeology is obviously bones. Met by now. So I chose bones because I just felt like it was just a unique concept, trying to like reconstruct past environments using bones. And just looking at other archaeological materials and all that, I really didn't feel like I fit in there. I really didn't feel like I can actually piece together the past and come up with something that I thought like was very interesting to me. So I really feel like I connect a lot with bones, and yeah, that's what I've been doing from my honors, and I got a lot of training from different people, and that's why today I am a bone specialist. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Recognize. And I mean, it's always very interesting to hear about everybody's experience and how they get into archaeology. I think our first video was where we discussed about how we all get into archaeology and stuff. And it's interesting how your first experience was looking at a find in the cradle, and then how that then eventually translated into you kind of connecting with bones as a subject matter. Whereas myself, for example, going into the field, also managing to get onto field schools as well, was such an incredibly cool experience to get hands-on, with archaeological material. For me, it was the stone tools, and picking up something like a hand axe, at a Stone Age site in the Northern Cape was just so incredible for me, and that's where that connection began. But then maybe Recognize that we could maybe move on to some of your other experiences in archaeology and stuff, and we spoke a little bit obviously before we started the meeting about dealing with issues of transformation in archaeology and how we move forward with the discipline and stuff. And you said you had some thoughts on that. Maybe could we maybe get into that?
Exactly. For me, I think this is just based on my own experience. Okay, I feel like archaeology would have been a little bit easy for me if I got a little bit of background knowledge from high school. So there wasn't any anybody in high schools now, they do a lot of career guidance and all that. So we didn't really get that, especially in public schools, like, having archaeologists themselves coming to, like, high schools talking about this. You normally get, engineers, you'd get psychologists, you'd get medical doctors going to schools talking about their field, but we never really got that. And even in life sciences, one subject that really touched a little bit, on archaeology, we really didn't get so much, exposure to this. So when I got to this, I just felt like, wow, I wish, I had a little bit of, education on this, from the archaeologists themselves, So I just felt like this is something that archaeologists need to, like, bring, up and talk a little bit about, going to schools, teaching students or learners in high schools about, archaeology. So when they go to university, they know that archaeology is something that they want to do. Because the truth is, a lot of students that I've spoken to, that I started, my first year with, have dropped out of archaeology. The reason is we never thought this is how it was, And as us Blacks, we really don't understand, archaeology. We just feel like, what is this, So when we go in there, we find, very difficult terminologies. We find a lot of difficult finds that we really can't explain. So for me, I just felt like a little bit of research that I got, from my teachers, that I asked a lot about archaeology, helped me. But what about those that don't have that privilege, So I feel like transformations should start, with archaeologists going to schools, telling people about archaeology and why it's important for them to go in there, And one other thing that I can say is, for me, I was very privileged enough to get a lot of, field work experience, like I did mention. I went out, asking around, who is doing this, who's doing what, can I help? I volunteered and did all of those things. But if archaeology on its own could, like, open up opportunities for students, to get themselves in the field, without students having to worry about, oh, where am I going to get the funding? Who's going to allow me to work with them in the field? I feel like it will help a lot, because I remember when I went to Tanzania, I had to ask about 5 people for funding, everyone just contributed a little bit towards my, field school. But I just feel like if even funding was available for these kind of things, a lot of students in archaeology would get themselves in the field to know exactly if archaeology is for them. Because you study and get your degree, you get your honors, you get your master's and your PhD, only to realize later that archaeology is really not for you because you've never done any practical work. Do you get me? So I just feel like then we need a lot of, practical work, from undergrad. I know we have field schools every now and then, but if they can bring a lot of those, because I feel like archaeology is more of a, a practical thing, So if we can be exposed to the field, we can be exposed to practical work, I think it will help a lot of students know at a very early stage, in their archaeology studies to, to know if that's the field for them.
Thanks, Recognize. That's so incredibly true. Getting into the field at an early stage, and thanks obviously for sharing your personal experiences. It's really interesting to hear about them. And that early kind of exposure, getting into the field, is what helps people fall in love with the discipline. Like you say, it's one thing sitting in the library, sitting in lectures and listening to obviously interesting content, but then to contextualize that content when you're standing within an archaeological landscape, it's just so important. And it really kind of ignites the passion. And it's a passion that you have clearly, when you're doing your analysis and stuff and all that. And it's so important. I'm going to hand over to Tim, though. He's got a question for you.
Yeah, to echo what you were saying, it's so true. Even for me when I first went to Mapungubwe, suddenly all this stuff started to make sense because you can see it. But also in the labs, and I know PAX, for example, is really good at this, and they bring artifacts to schools, and that's such an important part of the process. So, I think just, with what you said about schools, I couldn't agree with you more. It's so important for us to get into schools, and it's all schools in this country. Archaeology is so poorly represented in the curriculum. There's some archaeologists working really hard to change that, and they definitely are starting to do that and having really positive results. But the question I actually had was with regard to, for example, the Stone Age. You know, we in the Stone Age, there's a real challenge when it comes to transformation. We're seeing very few Black archaeologists coming through and specializing in the Stone Age. It's getting better, but it's been very slow compared to other industries. And now, if you look at like a talk we had recently with someone who spoke about the historic record and how it's important because it's so much more relatable, that people can see the historic record. It links to their family or a few generations back. If we want to start tackling transformation in the Stone Age in a more meaningful way, do you have any ideas how we can go about doing that?
Well, I'm thinking about it. In the Stone Age period, what is it that we can do that involves communities? Do you get me? Because I feel like a lot of Black students are so much interested in, interacting with communities. So I'm just thinking, for example, with my research, I'm dealing with, animal bones, right? It has no links to communities whatsoever. So I feel like if we could try and find projects that involve a lot of communities, then because we care a lot about culture, we care a lot about heritage, you see. So if we can find researchers that focus on bringing communities in, then I'm telling you, you see 1,000 Black students coming into the Stone Age period and studying whatever that is going on there.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah. That's a really good way of tackling it, because the community work that we'd been doing in Lesotho, for example, when we engage with communities, the way that people saw things like the Stone Age really did start to shift, because suddenly it started to become more real. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. We really want things that are relatable. That's it.
Thanks very much, Recognize. I'm going to hand over to Matt. He's also got a question for you.
Yeah, Recognize. Thanks for talking to us today. I was just wondering if you might feel comfortable, maybe.
Kara, your mic just turned off.
Yeah. Sorry. Apologies. I was just wondering if you might be willing to discuss your experiences as a woman, as a young woman coming up through the fields. Obviously, you've had particular experiences relating to being a woman coming up through your master's and potentially going on to PhD. And also, if you might have any ideas about, what might better serve your experience as a young woman trying to develop a career in archaeology.
Okay. So first thing first, I think when I, got to honors, I started looking at things, sometimes when you just undergrad, you just want to, study and get your degree and finish. I started, opening my eyes when I was in, my honors, and I realized that archaeology was a female-dominated field, especially at Wits. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I realized that it was through a lot of hard work, obviously, that all those women are out there, and it was also through a lot of things that they got themselves, into. So for me, I really didn't think that maybe being a woman, made me feel like, what, I wouldn't qualify in this field, or made me feel less of myself. I looked up to those women. I mean, if by now you know that Kathy has been somebody that mentored me from, first year. So I've always thought that, what, it's okay to be a woman in this field, especially with the kind of exposure that I had. Sometimes getting a lot of, experience from, undergrad, because of these field schools that I did, a lot of lab works that I did, really didn't make me feel like, oh no, this is a, a man's thing, whatever, something like that. So for me, I've always felt like there isn't really any like big deal, about this. Do you get me? And again, I'm thinking about it in archaeology. When Matt asked a question on WhatsApp, he asked something about gender issues and all that, in the archaeology space. I was thinking about it, especially with us, maybe Black people. It's easy for somebody like me as a woman to go into archaeology and study until my PhD. But it's a little bit difficult for Black archaeologists and men to study from first year until PhD, because they have a lot of responsibilities. We, get responsibilities from like an early age. When you go to university, it's always this whole thing of, you need to study so you can take care of the family. Do you get me? So we as women can continue to that level, but with them, especially knowing that in archaeology, jobs are not guaranteed. You just study and study and study and hope that one day you get a job. So a lot of us women can continue because we have less responsibilities, and also we are mainly driven by the love, unlike you men, that is, you're driven by, having to provide for the family and all that, you see. So I think that's also one of the reasons that made me feel like, what, I can stay in archaeology because the responsibilities are also, lower. And yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. No, well, thanks very much, Recognize. This has been really great. I think we're coming up on time now. But I mean, obviously, it's great to have you join us today and to talk about your personal experiences in archaeology. And obviously, that's so important. And it's obviously great to have you here with us. And in terms of how we focus on the transformation of archaeology, archaeology is all about hearing multiple voices. And for us to improve the representation in archaeology as a discipline is so important if we're going to hear and understand those voices more effectively moving forward in the future. So you raised some very important issues, such as getting more involved in schools and stuff, and focusing on that early grassroots development, and what that can then translate to down the line. So yeah, but I think we'll leave it at that. Obviously we could carry on talking, I'm sure for a long time, but Recognize, again, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be chatting to you soon. Hopefully we'll be able to see you soon at some point, depending on when this all blows over. But keep well, and thanks for that.
Yeah, and thanks so much for sharing your experience and your views. It's really awesome to hear.
Thank you. It felt like 1 minute. But thank you for having me.